Hello, my name is Carl Brown. I'm one of the ministers at North Highlands Baptist Church, and we're here at my home for another backyard Bible study. And if you enjoy our Bible studies and want to share them, we'd be happy for you to share them on Facebook or YouTube with anyone that you know, because we would like for more people to get into the study of God's Word. So, are you ready? Let's get into the Word. We've been going through the book of 1 Samuel, and last week we went 1 Samuel 16 through 20, and we covered David and Goliath. We covered the anointing of David, and we've talked about that. Now King Saul is very jealous, and last week we covered 4 or 5 different times that Saul has already tried to kill David, and it ended up last week with Jonathan coming out and telling David that sure enough, my dad is trying to kill you. He's set on killing you. And David takes off into a life of exile. It's kind of a horrible, terrible thing. Here he is, a hero of Israel, and he's having to go on a life on the run as an outlaw because the king just wants him dead because everybody likes him. And because the king knows that the Spirit of God is on him and has left Saul, and Saul is not only jealous, Saul wants to kill him to keep his family line going, trying to go against the prophecy that Samuel had said about Saul. Going against prophecy does not work too well. And we'll see that even more as we get into the lesson today. So we're starting in chapter 21, and we're going to go to chapter 25 today. So the first character we come to is in chapter 21, verse 1. We're introduced to Ahimelech. Now Ahimelech is a high priest of the Levitical town of Nob. And David runs to this town. Now I don't know, it may have been one of the refugee towns, one of the sanctuary cities, in the real sense that it was a sanctuary city, one of the places that God had set up for the Levites to be in charge of. And it's a town where the people who were convicted of murder, or people, well, specifically murder, manslaughter specifically, who had killed somebody accidentally, that they would run to and have protection there after a trial or during the trial, keeping the avenger from killing them. I don't know if it was one of those towns. I think it might have been. But high priest of the town is Ahimelech, and he's a really good man. And he sees David, and David shows up, and it flat out, it says that Ahimelech was trembling when he saw David. Now why is that? Well, David came alone. He didn't come with all of his men. He didn't come with his armies, his 1,000 men that had been assigned to him by Saul. And I think everybody knew at this point, word travels fast, that Saul was against David. So David showing up alone really had Ahimelech worried to death. He was trembling. And he even asked him in the first verse, why are you alone? Why is no one with you? Verse 2, David answered Ahimelech, the priest, the king charged me with a certain matter and said to me, no one is to know anything about your mission and your instructions. As for my men, I've told them to meet me at a certain place. Now then, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread and whatever you can find. So David lies to Ahimelech and tells him that he's on a secret mission from Saul, and that no one's supposed to know that. Real spy stuff. No one's going to know about it. My men are going to meet me at a certain place. No one's supposed to know, so I'm just telling you that's what I'm on. I can't give you the details, kind of if I could tell you, but if I tell you, I have to kill you kind of thing. Well, he wasn't telling the truth at all, and I think one of the reasons for that, and I'm not justifying this, but one of the reasons for that is I think David was really trying to protect Ahimelech. Really, the less you know, the more you can deny Ahimelech if word comes back that I was here. And so he asked Ahimelech for provisions. He said, can I have some bread? I'm starving. Can I have something to eat? And Ahimelech said, all I've got here is yesterday's showbread. And he said, well, it's yesterday's showbread. So he took that, and he says, if you got a sword, he said, I didn't even bring my sword with me. I'm sure Ahimelech was really suspicious. Well, obviously he was. He says, I didn't even bring my sword with me. If you got a sword, and just by chance, I don't know how it happened, Ahimelech, it had to be providence of God, had the sword of Goliath. And so Ahimelech's like, yeah, I got your sword. I got the sword of Goliath, the Philistine you killed. I guess the last time it was used, you cut off his head. It's yours, I guess. And David said, there's none like it. And so he takes the sword of Goliath. Now from there, David took off, and he actually went to the land of the Philistines. And while David is moving around, word gets out when he goes to places, and he starts collecting men. He's not trying to. They just start coming to him. It says that all the people who had debts that they didn't want to pay, all the people who were disgruntled with Saul as king, and all the outcasts, he just kind of has this band of misfits and of men that start gathering to him, and he ends up with about 400 men at this time, and he ends up growing to 600. And David and these 600 men become pretty famous warriors throughout all Israel. And it doesn't say that they started out as warriors, so kind of they became that with David as their leader. And anyway, so Saul hears about this band of men. He hears about how David's going around with this small army, and they're going from place to place. And he pitches a fit. Verse 6 of chapter 22. Now Saul heard that David and his men had been discovered, and Saul, spear in hand, was seated under the tamarisk tree on the hill at Gibeah, with all of his officials standing around him. Saul said to them, Listen, men of Benjamin, will the son of Jesse give all of you fields and vineyards? Will he make all of you commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds? Is that why you have conspired against me? No one tells me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. None of you is concerned about me or tells me that my son has incited my servant to lie and wait for me, as he does today. So he really pitches a good fit. And he's just like, guys, man, what is the deal? What's David doing for you that I'm not? Is he promising you things? Is he going to give you part of the kingdom if you come in? If I die? I mean, you didn't even tell me, guys, when my own son made a covenant with him not to kill him. My own son did that, and you didn't. And he's tried to talk David into killing me, and none of you did anything. Y'all are all a bunch of worthless. None of you are faithful. Well, truth be told, I don't think they really did like Saul. They really did like David. And they really did like Jonathan. They had a lot of respect for them, but they had been losing respect over time for Saul. And this didn't help. This little hissy fit, this little pity party, these accusations and all that in front of all of his commanders under the whatever kind of tree didn't help at all. And so one guy who is an opportunist heard this. His name is Doeg. Verse 9 says, But Doeg the Edomite, who was standing with Saul's officials, said, I saw the son of Jesse come to Ahimelech, son of Ahitub of Nob. Ahimelech inquired of the Lord for him. He also gave him provisions and the sword of Goliath the Philistine. Wow. So the king sent for the priest Ahimelech and his father's whole family, who were priests of Nob, and they came out to the king. So this Doeg, the shepherd guy, squeals. Just says, oh, well, none of your commanders are going to tell you anything. I'll tell you something. Hey, I saw David. And he just squeals. He tells everything to Saul, which is a bad deal, because now Saul brings all the priests of Nob, all the family of Ahimelech to him. And he confronts them. Verse 13, Why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, giving him bread and a sword and inquiring of God for him, so that he has rebelled against me and lies in wait for me as he does today? Man, it was for good reason that Ahimelech was trembling when he saw David. Everybody knew the unstable mental condition of Saul, and that a king in an unstable mental condition is a very dangerous thing. You don't know if he's going to be good. You don't know if he's going to be bad. You don't know if he's going to be mad or glad. You don't know anything You don't know what to expect. And so Ahimelech was scared. But Ahimelech, even though he was full of fear, was faithful. He was faithful, not only to David, but to his calling and to the Lord. I love what Ahimelech says. Let's look at it. Verse 14. Ahimelech answered the king, "Who of all your servants is as loyal as David, the king's son-in-law, captain of your bodyguard, and highly respected in your household? Was that day the first time I inquired of God for him? Of course not. Let not the king accuse your servant or his father's family, for your servant knows nothing at all about this whole affair." So Ahimelech says, why are you mad at David? David's been nothing but good to you. He's fantastic. He loves you. He's done great things for you. He's the most respected soldier you have, most respected person in your house. Why wouldn't I inquire of God for him? Not only have I done it before, I would do it again. Ahimelech really stands up here. But the king said, "You will surely die, Ahimelech, you and your father's whole family." And King Saul does something here that is absolutely bizarre and well over the top. He tells his commanders to kill Ahimelech and all the priests that were with him, his entire family of priests, all the priests of Nob. Now the commanders, I told you, they're losing respect for Saul. They said, no, we're not doing it. We're not killing the priest. No, no, I'm not doing that. You find another guy. We're not doing it. Saul couldn't even get his military commanders and his followers to follow a direct order to kill the priest, these innocent priests. So you know who we ask? Doeg the opportunist, the shepherd opportunist. He tells the God, the squealer, he says, hey, you do it. And Doeg does. He not only kills all 85 of the priests of Nob, which was Ahimelech's whole family, almost his whole family, but they go and they destroy and slaughter all of Nob, all the women, all the children, all the infants, all the donkeys, all the cattle, everything. They burn the city to the ground. They destroy all of Nob. I mean, just like they dropped a bomb on it. And that's the kind of thing that God did in judgment to the enemies of the Lord. And here Saul is doing this to the Lord's people and the Levites. That's a new low for Saul. But he does it. One son gets away. Abiathar. I'm going to call him Abathar just because it's easier for me to say. Abathar gets away and he runs to David and he tells him everything that has happened. And when David finds out everything that has happened, he does something that is really quite remarkable. In verse 22 of chapter 22, David said to Abathar, "That day when Doeg the Edomite was there, I knew he would be sure to tell Saul, 'I am responsible for the death of your father's whole family.'" David took responsibility. He didn't pass it off. He didn't pass the buck. He had seen Doeg there, and somehow he knew Doeg was going to be a squealer, and he could have stopped it then, but he didn't. And he takes full responsibility for Ahimelech's death in the face of Abathar, and calls Abathar to be with him and minister to them as a priest. So what's the lesson we learned from these two chapters? A first lesson for today. And I think we get it from Ahimelech. Ahimelech, even though he was full of fear, even though Ahimelech was fully innocent and put between a rock and a hard place, Ahimelech was faithful. And that's a good lesson. And he lost his life for it. He is a martyr. He lost his life for it. But Ahimelech was faithful in the face of fear, in the face of injustice. He was still faithful to God, faithful to his calling, and faithful to God's anointed people. I have tremendous respect and admiration for Ahimelech and what he did. Let us be like Ahimelech, and let us stand strong for the Lord. Let us have a great testimony, because this life is short. Eternity is long. That's a good short little lesson we get from Ahimelech, a tragic story of his life. Let's move on. When we get to chapter 23, we see that David, he's got this fighting force now of about 600 guys. And even though he is in exile, he is still fighting the Lord's battles. He finds out that the Philistines are attacking and raiding against Keilah. And that's an Israelite town. And so they come and they ask for help from David, not Saul. They come and ask David for help. He happens to be in the area. He happens to be close. He's the great leader. He's the great military guy. He's the one that slays 10,000s. And so they come and ask him for help. And so he asks the Lord, should I go help them? And the Lord says, I'm going to give them to you. You can take them. But his guys, his 600 guys, they haven't really done a battle yet. And so they're really not battle proven at all. And they're like, are you sure, David? We're with you, but are you sure? Can we get a second opinion? And so David says, all right. And he goes back to the priest again, Abiathar, and he seeks the Lord. And the Lord says, yes, I'm giving them to you. You're going to have a great victory. And so David takes his 600 men and they defeat the Philistines at Keilah. And they says they got great plunder, and they're living in the city. The 600 guys have a place to stay for a bit. Well, here comes Saul. He finds out that they're in Keilah, and he's like, well, God's given them into my hand, because now they're in a fortified city with a wall around it, and I can surround them and they won't be able to get out. So David finds out about it, and he asked the Lord. He said, Lord, is Saul really going to come down here and try to take me even after I've defeated the Philistines? And the Lord said, yes, he's going to do that. And he said, well, Lord, would the people of Keilah, would they give me over to Saul after we just defended them against the Philistines? And the Lord said, yeah, they give you to Saul. So the people of Keilah were grateful, but they weren't that grateful. So David left. And it's really neat. He keeps going place to place. And one of the people who comes out to see him while he's in exile is his good friend Jonathan, the king's son, the prince. And it says here that in verses 16, it says, Saul's son Jonathan went to David at Horesh and helped him to find strength in God. Encouraged him. He encouraged him in the Lord. He's a good friend. Encouraged him in the Lord. And he says, don't be afraid, he said. My father Saul will not lay a hand on you, and you will be king over Israel, and I will be second to you. Even my father Saul knows this. The two of them made a covenant before the Lord. Then Jonathan went home, but David remained in Horesh. So how did it get out that David was anointed the king? I don't think Samuel told people, because he kind of did it in secret. I'm thinking Jesse probably did it. Maybe Jesse and maybe Jesse's sons. It got out. Somehow it got out. It just didn't stay a secret that he was anointed next. And everybody believed it. Everybody believed David was going to be the next king. It was obvious God's hand was on him. That's the only way he could accomplish the kind of amazing feats that he's accomplishing is with the hand of the Lord. And everybody loved him. Even Saul knew that he was going to be the next king, as Jonathan just tells us here. And Jonathan even admits it and is okay with it and tells him, hey, I'll just be your second in command. Forget about me being prince. I'll just be second in command to you. We're best buddies. It's going to be fine. And he encourages David. But Saul doesn't give up. He pursues David again, and he keeps pursuing him. And it's really kind of funny. He gets really close. He takes 3,000 of the best soldiers out of Israel. He takes 3,000 with him, and he's chasing David's 600. And they come to this mountain, and they give this great picture of Saul's army being on one side of the mountain and David's army running away on the other side of the mountain. So you can see Saul's army running up the mountain, and you see David's army running down the mountain. And And then Saul gets a messenger going, hey, the Philistines are coming. The Philistines are here. And so Saul has to stop the pursuit and head back and defend Israel against these Philistines that happen to be right there. And so the mountains there, the mountain peaks in the middle, you got David on one side and you got Saul on the other, came really close to a confrontation. And apparently everybody knew about it. They ended up calling the mountain the place of parting because Saul went one way and David went another. How many times has Saul tried to kill David now? Are we up to 8, 9? I'm losing count. But it's not all, because as soon as Saul is done with those Philistines, he turns around and comes back again to where he hears David is. After Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told, David is in the desert of En-gedi. So Saul took 3,000 chosen men from all Israel and set out to look for David and his men near the crags of the wild goats. Crags of the wild goats. Well, crags are steep rock formations. And on the edge of mountains will be steep rock formations. And you know how goats are on those, so I just think it's kind of neat. That's what this is, Crag of the Wild Goats. So apparently a bunch of goats lived in these steep rock formations on this mountain in the desert of En-gedi. He came to sheep pens along the way. A cave was there, and Saul went in to relieve himself. David and his men were far back in the same cave. The men said to David, this is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish. Then David crept up unnoticed and he cut off the corner of Saul's robe. Wow, so Saul's trying to kill David and he's chasing him again, and he's the king, so he doesn't just relieve himself anywhere. He's got to go potty, so he goes up in this cave up on the hill, and he's going in there to go potty. He gets in the dark where he can relieve himself, and while he's relieving himself, doing his business, David creeps up and he cuts the corner of his robe off when he could have easily cut his neck. And what a humiliating and horrible and terrible way to be murdered as king of Israel that would have been. How easy it would have been for David to do it as well. And everybody would have rallied to him because he's so popular. Everybody knows he's going to be the next king, and Saul is so unstable. But now we see a little bit more of David's heart. Let's look at this, verse 5. Afterward, David was conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of his robe. He said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lift my hand against him, for he is the anointed of the Lord. With these words, David rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul. And Saul left the cave and went his way. They had him. David had him. He had the opportunity to put all this to end all of this, to put Saul down, to kill him, to eliminate him. He's the next anointed. He's the next king. Why didn't David do it? Why didn't David just kill Saul? Why didn't David just allow his men to kill Saul? I mean, they were at odds. They were fighting. He could have been a king by conquest, but no, he wasn't a king by conquest. David had been anointed. But here's the thing. Saul had also been anointed king. And David respected God's authority. And the Lord is the one who will avenge. He was not going to kill the Lord's anointed. The Lord would take him out in his time and in his way. But it wasn't going to be David who did it, because God had anointed him king. It wasn't David's job to remove him as king. It was God's job. It was under God's authority he was king. It was God's job to remove him as king. And David was not going to have any of it. He said, he's my king. He may be against me, but he's my king. He's my master. He wanted other people to also respect the authority of God as well. Let God be the one who decides our kings instead of people. That's great wisdom that David had in that moment. That's our good Second lesson today. If I am faithful to the Lord will take care of my reputation. The Lord will take care of my enemies if I'm just faithful to Him, if I am on His side. And that's where David wanted to be. He was far more concerned about being on God's side than he was about King Saul. So what happens next? Then David called out of the cave. He comes out of the cave. Saul's going back to his men. And he called out to Saul, "My lord the king." When Saul looked behind him, David bowed down and prostrated. I told my son what this is today. He laid face down on the ground in humility and submission. He prostrated himself with his face to the ground. He said to Saul, "Why do you listen when men say David is bent on harming you? This day you have seen with your own eyes how the Lord delivered you into my hands in the cave. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not lift my hand against my master, because he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, look at this piece of your robe in my hand." Can you see Saul right here? He's like grabbing his cape, and he's looking at his cape, and he's seeing that, and he sees that he has it. Imagine how his heart fell at that moment. He realized how close he was to dying. Man, I cut off the corner of your robe, but I did not kill you. Now understand and recognize that I am not guilty of wrongdoing or rebellion. I have not wronged you, but you are hunting me down to take my life. May the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord avenge the wrongs you have done to me. By my hand will not touch you. As the old saying goes, from evildoers comes evil deeds, so my hand will not touch you. He was not going to do something evil, even if it put his own life at stake. So how did Saul respond to all this? Very interesting. Verse 16. When David finished saying this, Saul asked, "Is that your voice, David, my son?" And he wept aloud. "You are more righteous than I," he said. "You have treated me well, but I have treated you badly. You have just now told me of the good you did to me. The Lord delivered me into your hands, but you did not kill me. When a man finds his enemy, does he let him get away unharmed? May the Lord reward you well for the way you treated me today. I know that you will surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hands." Saul knew. Saul confessed. Saul was ashamed. And this is as close as he's going to come to saying, "I'm sorry. You're right. I've treated you badly. You've treated me well. You're more righteous than I am. You're certainly going to be king. May God bless you for what you did for me today. You saved my life." It was a real poignant moment for Saul. And so then Saul begs a promise from David in verse 21. "Now swear to me by the Lord that you will not cut off my descendants or wipe out the name of my father's family." So David gave his oath to Saul. He didn't want David to become king and do in the manner of kings and kill all the descendants and all the family of the king, just like Saul had just done to Nob and destroy an entire family. He didn't want that to happen to him. So David promised not to do that to his family, which was a great promise to make, and again show more of the heart of David. And he kept that promise, and we'll see that later as we keep studying. But look at what happens next. Then Saul returned home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold. David didn't follow Saul at that point. No, he stayed with his 600 men and kept his distance from Saul. Why? Because Saul was unstable. Is this the last time Saul tries to kill David? Nope. Nope, not done yet. What's our count at? 9, 10? Does David stay consistent in his conviction that the Lord will avenge his name? Nope. And we're about to see that in the next chapter. But this day was a good day for David. And this had to be a very difficult thing for David to do in such dire circumstances. He had tremendous faith in God. and had a heart that was in tune with God. And that just made him the admiration of all of his men, all of his enemies' men, and all of the people of Israel. And God said, here's David, a man after my own heart. That brings us to chapter 25. Well, we learn in verse 1, Samuel finally dies. Now, Samuel was very old when he anointed Saul, it said, and now Saul has reigned for like 35, 40 years or more, and now Samuel is really, really, really old, and he dies, and they bury him, and all the people are mourning. But David keeps moving because he is still a nomad. He's still in exile. He's still fearful of Saul and his instability. And so now he's in the desert of Maon. And let's get to verse 2 of chapter 25, and we have a couple of new characters introduced to the story. A certain man in Maon who had property there at Carmel was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman, but her husband, a Calebite, was surly and mean in his dealings. Surly and mean. You don't hear the word surly very often. So we got two new characters. We have Nabal, who was wealthy, but also grumpy and mean and ugly to people. We don't see that very often in Scripture. This guy must have been a real piece of work. And then we have Abigail, who we are told is a beautiful and intelligent woman, married to Nabal. And so obviously, most likely, 99% sure it was an arranged marriage. And obviously, women did not get to really pick their husbands at this time. That was all kind of decided for them by the men in their lives. So I'm going to read just about this entire story. We're looking now in verse 4 through 9 of chapter 25. While David was in the desert, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So he sent 10 young men and said to them, "Go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name. Say to him, 'Long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours. Now I hear that it is sheep shearing time. When your shepherds were with us, we did not mistreat them. And the whole time we were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. Ask your servants, and they will tell you. Therefore, be favorable toward my young men, since we come at a festive time. Please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them.' When David's men arrived, they gave Nabal this message in David's name. Then they waited." So it must have been difficult for David. I mean, here David is. Not only is he in exile, not only is he having to go around from different places that are really obscure places and not popular places, and now he's ended up in this desert of Maon. And usually what happens when you have a military group, when they went around and they didn't have a supply chain, they just ate off the land. They would eat whatever was there, and people couldn't argue with them because they didn't have an army. So they would just eat off the land. They would eat whatever came to their hand. Well, Nabal's very wealthy, and he has a lot of cattle, these sheep and so on, and so goats, and they're all out there where the men are at, where David's men are at. And what would normally happen is they would just take sheep as they needed sheep. And what could Nabal do? He didn't do it. But not only was that the case, when they were out there like that, when you didn't have an army, when you didn't have a group of men protecting your cattle or sheep, raiders would come in all the time and take a few. Man, it was just a given thing. It happened all the time. People would come in, they would raid your group. They were thieves. They would steal your sheep, your goat, whatever. Well, David's men didn't take anything from Nabal. And more than that, they protected them. They protected them from any harm. And so David said, "You know what? We've been good to you. Please please, would you help us with food? Because here David's trying to feed 600 men all the time. We have this festival coming up. We're kind of out of food. Would you mind, whatever seems good to you, would you mind giving us some food, please? Verse 10 and 11. Nabal answered David's servants, who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take my bread and my water and the meat I have slaughtered for my shares and give it to men coming from who knows where? He said, no. Who are you? Who do you think you are? Get lost. Forget it. They reported every word. David says to his men in verse 13, put on your swords. So they put on their swords, and David put on his. About 400 men went up with David, while 200 stayed with the supplies. All right, man, it's all about to break loose now. He has done poked the bear. He's done thrown a rock at the hornet's nest. Here you've got a peaceful group of literally mercenaries, military men, who have won several battles, who have helped you and defended you, and now you have insulted them greatly and decided you weren't going to help them even though they helped you. Woo-wee! David was insulted. David was hot. But one of the servants was really wise. In verse 14, one of the servants told Nabal's wife Abigail, David sent messengers from the desert to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at them. Yes, these men were very good to us. They did not mistreat us, and the whole time we were out in the fields near them, nothing was missing. Night and day they were a wall around us. All the time we were herding our sheep near them. Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him. This servant just lays it out there to Abigail. Abigail, you got to do something. Nabal's just done something stupid. He's a wicked man, and he must have been really wicked for him to be able to say that to his wife. He's a wicked man. Look what he's done to David. They have protected us. They actually kept us from raiding parties. They never took a thing. They never asked anything of us. And here they send their greetings, and Nabal insults them. You better do something. David's going to come kill all of us. So what did Abigail do? I want you to look in verse 18. Abigail lost no time. Abigail was smart. She lost no time. She acted quickly. And she did. It says here she took a feast. She got I bet you anything that she took everything that they had prepared. She grabbed everything on hand that she had prepared. And she actually grabbed enough food for him and all of his men to have a meal. And it's a good thing she did too, because I want you to see David's frame of mind. In verse 21, David just said to his men, it's been useless all my watching over this fellow's property in the desert so that nothing of his was missing. He paid me back evil for good. May God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave one male alive of all who belong to him. David was coming in for blood. He was hot. He was mad. He was going to take it out on Nabal with his sword and with his men. I'm laughing because just in the chapter before, David did a great thing, and he says, vengeance is the Lord's. I will not avenge myself because the Lord's going to take care of me. And then in the very next chapter, he gets insulted by a fool, and what's he do? He's going to go avenge himself. He's hot-tempered and he's mad about it. David was not perfect. So what happens? And this is so good. Abigail sees David. She comes off and she's there and she's got the feast with her, and she bows down right in front of David. Now David is on his way, but when a beautiful woman comes and kneels at your feet, it's going to get your attention, and it got David's attention. And this is what she said. My Lord, let the blame be on me alone. Please let your servant speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. And from this point on, she's calling herself a servant, and she's calling David the master instead of calling her husband Nabal a master. Matter of fact, she has another word for him. You'll see it in a minute. Hear what your servant has to say. Verse 25. May the Lord pay no attention to that wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name. His name is fool. So Nabal means fool. He's living up to his name. And folly goes with him. But as for me, your servant, I did not see the men my master sent. Now, since the Lord has kept you, my master, from bloodshed, and from avenging yourself with your own hands, as surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, may your enemies and all who intend to harm my master be like Nabal. And let this gift, which your servant has brought to my master, be given to the men who follow you. Please forgive your servant's offense, talking about herself. For the Lord will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my master, because he fights the Lord's battles. Let no wrongdoing be found in you as long as you live. Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my master will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies he will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. When the Lord has done for my master every good thing he promised concerning him, and has appointed him leader over Israel, my master will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or having avenged himself. When the Lord has brought my master success, remember your servant. Wow! I mean, this is absolutely the most genius, brilliant move by Abigail. Her speech, her plea in front of David could not have been worded better, could not have been better in any way. She reminds him of his reputation, which she knows. And she says, you're fighting the Lord's battles. The Lord is taking care of your enemies. Matter of fact, you didn't even slay Saul when you had a chance. You're not doing that. You're letting the Lord do the work. She knows what he's just done. And then she even reminds him about how the Lord was with him with the Philistines by saying that the Lord was going to take care of his enemies like a stone from the pocket of a sling. What's she referring to? The death of Goliath. She says the Lord has taken care of far greater enemies than my husband Nabal, this fool that I have for a husband. Don't be wicked like him. Don't lower yourself to his level. That's what she's saying. And then she says, remember your reputation, but more than that, remember what the Lord has promised you, and you don't want this act that you're about to do, this reaction to a fool, to tarnish your reputation when he brings you into power. You don't want the staggering burden, she says, of bloodshed on your hands and avenging yourself instead of the Lord doing it. Don't do this, she says. Blame me, she says. Take this gift, she gives. Abigail was beautiful. It's right there that she was a beautiful woman. But Abigail's gift was her intelligence. She was brilliant. Could not have been done more perfectly. She knew David had murder on the brain, but she very coyly reminded him of his reputation and why he had it, and that he didn't want to lose it. It was just, wow, what a woman. It was incredible. Did it work? Verse 32, David said to Abigail, praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you to me today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands. Go home in peace. I have heard your words and granted your request. It worked. And David praised God. David showed wisdom here again. David showed wisdom by recognizing that God had put Abigail in his path and stopped him from doing something that was wrong and something that would be an abomination, be evil in the eyes of the Lord for someone that was his anointed. And so David praised God for it. And that brings me to my next lesson for today. Listen to the Abigails God puts in your path. There are many, many times in our life when we are doing something in our own thinking that needs checked. And the Lord knows about it. He knows our thoughts. He knows our intentions. And He sends an Abigail in your path to let you know what you're doing is wrong, to remind you of what you need to be reminded of, and also to show you what you're about to do to your own reputation. Now, not every Abigail thrown into your life will be a beautiful, intelligent woman, but there are Abigails that are thrown out there in front of us as Christians, and we need to have the wisdom of David to listen and to heed when that happens, instead of staying in our own arrogance, our own narcissistic self, and think that we know what's right and what we're doing is always right. That's a very important lesson. That lesson was taught to me. Well, I have to say that lesson's been taught to me many times in my life. But I'm going to share with you one of the times when I was probably most ashamed in my life. When I was a senior in college, I wasn't living on campus where I was, and I was trying desperately to find a place to live that was in a budget of me being a pizza delivery driver part-time while I went to school full-time. And I was having a hard time finding a place. I finally found this elderly woman in the church that needed someone to rent a room. And she needed it because she needed some money to help pay her bills. And so we talked together, and she let me rent a room from her, and she was very good to me. She was an amazing woman, became like a grandmother to me. She just was so very good to me for the very little amount that I was paying her in rent. But to my shame, I want to tell you, I wasn't very good about paying my rent. I always paid it every month, but I paid it in the month when I wanted to pay it. So I would keep the money in my account as long as I could because of my own bills, and then pay it when I knew I had more money coming in that day. And so I was paying her at different times in the month and not on a specific day. I was young and dumb and in college, and I thought, I guess this was fine, or the lady would be fine. And then this elder woman in the church, not the lady I was renting a room from, this elder woman in the church gives me a phone call. And she asked me to come by and see her one day. I didn't even know her. But I said, sure. She says, there's something very important I would like to talk to you about. I didn't know her. I didn't know her name. I just knew about her and knew her relationship in the church. So I went to her house. She's very kind. Nice old woman. And she sat me down. She served me tea and cakes, a little cookie or whatever. So she had me sit down in front of her. And as I'm sitting there, she laid out in front of me the truth and told me what I was doing to her friend, the lady I was renting from, and how her friend had anguished because she was having a hard time paying her bills on time because I was being lax about my payment and not giving it to her on a specific day. And she shamed me. Not in a mean way, but in a very honest and critical way. And I thank God that I took it. I felt the shame on me. I mean, I guess I could have gotten angry, and I thank God that I didn't react that way. I certainly could have. I wasn't that mature, but it shamed me. And I'm telling you, I left that house. I thanked her. I left that house, went straight to the bank, got the money, went straight to my landlord, and I paid her, and I promised her that I would never do that again, and that she would always have her money on the same day, and confessed my sin to her and asked her forgiveness. And I'm telling you right now, I would have never done that if this lady had not stepped into my business. Thank God for her. I don't know her name, but I'm going to call her Abigail. When God puts an Abigail in your life, you listen to her. You listen to him. You listen to the person that he puts in your path to keep you from continuing on your path that is not in God's will. That's a lesson to take from today that I hope we can all apply to our lives every day. So what's the final outcome with Nabal and Abigail and David? It's really quite interesting. It starts in verse 36. When Abigail went to Nabal, he was in the house holding a banquet like that of a king. He really was a fool. He refused to give David anything, yet now he's having a banquet like he's a king. He was in high spirits and very drunk. Another sign he's a fool. So she told him nothing until daybreak. Then in the morning, when Nabal was sober, his wife told him all these things, and his heart failed him, and he became like a stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. When Abigail told Nabal that David was on his way, this famous David who killed Goliath, this famous David who with just 600 men had defended cities against the Philistines, this famous David who was the greatest warrior in all the land, was coming with his 400 famous men to destroy and kill Nabal and his entire household. Nabal was literally scared to death. Scared to death. It says his heart fell in him like a stone. And he wasn't the same for 10 days and he died. Whew. Anyway, when David heard in verse 39 that Nabal was dead, he said, "Praise be to the Lord who has upheld my cause against Nabal, treating me with contempt. He has kept his servant from doing wrong and has brought Nabal's wrongdoing down on his head." Get this. Then David sent word to Abigail asking her to become his wife. David wasn't no fool. He wasn't let this beautiful, intelligent woman get away. He snatched her right up, man. He didn't let that go. As we read the rest of this chapter, we find that David did indeed take her as his wife, and actually had already taken another wife because Saul had given his wife away. And we got this polygamy that we see a lot in the Old Testament. In those times, it was part of that culture. And so at this point, David has 3 wives. One of them is estranged because Saul gave her to another man, but he has 2 wives that are with him, Abigail and this other woman. And I just think it's kind of interesting. In the New Testament, Jesus really lays it out that, it was meant for one man to be with one woman, that they be husband and wife. It was not meant to be more than that. Yet we see in the Old Testament a lot of the leaders and men in the Old Testament have several wives. This is not the last wife David's going to gain. And then Solomon, his son, went crazy with the wives and concubines. And what we do see in the Old Testament, though, is that it never works out well. That it is always a bad idea. So there we go. Very good lessons that we learned today. I hope that you take to heart from the life of David in exile. He continues in exile next week as we go through chapters 26 through the end of the book, chapter 31. So we have 6 chapters for next week. More stories. Saul's not done, and David's not king over Israel yet. So we're going to continue with his life in exile, part 2, next week. And I look forward to it. I hope you've enjoyed our Bible study. Please share this with family, with friends, with anyone you know who would love a good Bible study. And we'll get into the Word again next week. Thank you and have a good night.